My father said, "You are no longer part of this family. But today I lead a multi-million-dollar company and help invisible young people like me." I grew up in a home where diplomas were valued more than dreams. Every choice outside the expected path was seen as rebellion, as failure. When I finally had the courage to say I wouldn't follow the plan laid out for me, my father looked me in the eyes and said I was no longer part of the family. At that moment I thought my world had ended. But what came next was much more than pain. It was the beginning of a reconstruction that changed everything. I faced loneliness, invisibility, and rejection. But I also discovered who I was, what I could create, and how far I could go when I stopped asking for permission to exist. Today, my journey inspires others who were also discredited. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far the voice of the wrong daughter can echo. From an early age, I learned that my home functioned like a classroom that never closed its doors. Dinners revolved around rankings, goals, and tests. My father loved to recite statistics about the best courses in the country, while my mother listed registration deadlines as if reciting prayers. I listened attentively, wanting to comply, but feeling more and more like a foreigner in that world. The sparkle I found creating websites, designing icons, or browsing design forums they never saw. At night, hidden under the covers with my laptop on my lap, I felt like I belonged to another universe. One where I wasn't measured by report cards but by ideas. I created imaginary platforms, organized fictitious products, and tested color palettes. It was like putting together puzzles that only I saw complete. But every time one of my parents walked by the door, I switched tabs. It was my little crime. Creating in silence. A silence that screamed for acceptance. One afternoon my father caught me off guard with the screen open on a code editor. I wanted to explain, to show him what I was doing, but his words came before my courage. He said with a furrowed brow and a voice laden with disappointment, "Why are you wasting your time with this, Ruby?" My heart sank. Wasting time. That's what he called what made me feel alive. "Why are you wasting your time with this, Ruby?" says the father. Natalie was the opposite of me in everything the Lawsons valued. While I designed layouts, she collected awards. She won a full scholarship to medical school and became the example everyone used as a benchmark. Natalie studied for hours without complaining, they'd say between bites. She knew what she wanted from an early age, they'd emphasize, looking at me like someone staring at an unsolved puzzle. I sat at the table, but I didn't really feel like I was there. Invisible among words of exaltation that were never mine. At school, no one knew I existed. At home, neither. My presence was like a silent backdrop to my sister's accomplishments. When they asked about my future, it was always to correct my course, never to listen to what I desired. I started swallowing my desires as if they were mistakes. I smiled less, spoke less, showed up less. It was easier that way. Even so, I observed my parents' proud looks when Natalie talked about her anatomy classes. My mother's soft laugh, my father's emotional expression. They saw her. Not just on the outside but on the inside. I wondered what it would be like to be celebrated, even for an instant. What it would be like to have that kind of love directed at me, without having to transform myself into someone else. Ruby watches Natalie smiling with her parents, wondering if she would ever be celebrated. The decision matured in silence like everything in me. The day came for the dinner when everyone expected me to reveal where I had applied. The food smelled of formality. Cutlery clinked between rehearsed phrases. And then I took a deep breath. "I'm not applying to any college," I announced, my voice firmer than I expected. The world stopped. The sound of the television became distant noise. I stared at the tablecloth, trying to keep breathing. My mother seemed not to understand. She repeated, "None?" as if I had spoken in another language. Natalie frowned. But it was my father who reacted with the most impact. He slowly rose as if he had heard an insult. For a moment, I thought he was going to talk to me, ask something, but he just left the room. Not a word. The sound of the door closing echoed like a sentence. I felt the air leave my lungs. The weight of the silence fell over me like a wet blanket. No one tried to defend me. No one asked why. I knew that from that moment on, something inside that house had changed forever. I wasn't just a disappointment. I was a rupture. An open wound. The daughter who chose not to follow the script, and would pay for it. So you are no longer part of this family. With the little I managed to save, I rented a tiny studio on a narrow downtown street. 3 suitcases, a mattress on the floor, and my laptop. That was all I had left. But for the first time, the silence around me wasn't oppressive, it was mine. I started developing Rustic Cart, a platform where small artisans could sell directly to the public. I worked day and night with cold coffee and repeated playlists. There was no luxury, but there was freedom. Each line of code was a way to rebuild myself. Every tested feature an attempt to validate that I was not a mistake. I had no support, no guarantees. Just an idea in my head and a deep thirst to prove, if only to myself, that I could create something useful. The days dragged on, but they carried a purpose. I slept little, but I dreamed more awake than ever. And then on a random Tuesday it happened. A customer finalized the first sale on the platform. $12. An order for handmade candles. I looked at the screen and couldn't hold back the tears. That meant that someone somewhere had trusted something I created. It was little, but it was real. I had begun, and no one could erase that. First customer closes a $12 sale. Ruby cries alone. 2 months later, euphoria gave way to chaos. I was leaving a meeting with a local artisan when a car ran a red light. Everything spun. The impact was quick, but the consequences seemed endless. I woke up in the hospital with my arm immobilized and my head throbbing. My insurance had been canceled weeks before. I had no savings, no one to turn to. With each bill received, I felt my world crumble a little more. The physical pain was less than the financial. Returning to the studio felt like returning to a ruined prison. Sales stopped. Focus evaporated. I spent days staring at the screen, not daring to touch the keyboard. What I had built began to disappear before my eyes. The hope I carried was now just a pale sketch. I felt like I was at the bottom of a well without a rope. It was while reviewing my backpack in the hospital, looking for a receipt, that a flyer fell to the floor. It was for a tech meetup in the city, a gathering of developers, investors, and entrepreneurs. I read and reread the paper with blurry eyes. It seemed to come from another universe, one that no longer belonged to me. But something in me held that paper like an anchor. Perhaps it was the last thread of hope. A tech meetup flyer falls from her backpack in the hospital. That night, the rain fell as if it wanted to erase the world. Even so, I went. I took a bus and walked to the warehouse where the event was taking place. I arrived soaked, with a makeshift badge and a hesitant smile. The place buzzed with confident people, with expensive laptops and success stories. I stayed in a corner, feigning interest in a lecture on scalability. I felt invisible again, surrounded by others' achievements that seemed unattainable. When I finally thought about leaving, something made me stay 5 more minutes. Perhaps it was stubbornness, perhaps fear of giving up again. I walked to the coffee table, trying to look less out of place. I was about to put the flyer in my pocket when I heard footsteps approaching. I slowly turned, expecting another judgmental look. But instead I saw a red blazer and a curious gaze. The woman stopped in front of me and smiled confidently. "Are you building something?" she asked, her voice firm. I don't know how I answered. I only remember the heat rising to my face and the strange sensation of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in months. That felt like the beginning of something I didn't yet understand, but that was already calling to me. But then a woman in a red blazer approaches. Her name was Marcia Bennett. The red blazer matched her firm presence. She sat beside me and asked, without beating around the bush, "What are you building?" The question froze me for a second. I told her about Rustic Cart, the idea of helping artisans, the small tests. She listened to everything in silence, leaning slightly forward, her eyes attentive. When I finished, she took a notebook from her bag and began to write. We talked for almost 2 hours, as if the world around us had disappeared. Marcia wasn't the type to praise out of politeness. She pointed out every flaw in my model as if drawing a new map. She spoke of margin, scale, customer profile. I wrote everything down, sweating inside. She saw potential, but she also saw a flawed system. And I felt more than ever that perhaps it was possible to truly start over. When I mentioned my difficulties in scaling the platform, she leaned in and said with a provocative tone, "You want to sell to consumers? What if you sold to retail chains?" The idea seemed distant from my reality. I had thought small out of fear. Marcia looked at me as if she already knew the next step, even if I was still in the dark. And for the first time I wanted to see how far this could go. You want to sell to consumers. What if you sold to retail chains? Marcia was direct but never harsh. She didn't try to convince me. She just showed me paths I didn't see. With her help, I began to understand the B2B universe, the business model for companies. It was a different game with different rules. I resisted at first. I was afraid of losing the little I had built. But after everything I had faced, what more was there to lose? One quiet morning I sat in front of my laptop and typed the words CraftLogic at the top of the screen. The name pulsed like a promise. I abandoned Rustic Cart and began the repositioning. New brand, new audience, new pitch. I felt as if I was burning the last bridge to my past, and that freed me. I spent hours adjusting the discourse, studying, designing interfaces with a much clearer purpose. Marcia followed every step with demanding patience. She taught about contracts, solution testing, and entry channels. She didn't treat me as someone to be saved, but as someone capable. That, in itself, was transformative. For the first time I felt guided, not diminished. I began to see entrepreneurship not as an escape, but as an expression of my voice, a voice that was slowly gaining volume. Ruby renames to CraftLogic and creates a new pitch. At the second meetup, I recognized Jared Moore, a designer who had asked intelligent questions at the last lecture. He came up to me, curious about the startup's new name. I showed him the pitch, explained the change in focus and the reason for CraftLogic. His eyes lit up. He said he had recently left a startup that had closed and was looking for a new challenge. In a few hours, we were already sketching prototypes together. For 7 days, we pulled all-nighters in my cramped studio. Jared was brilliant and calm. I was exhausted but excited. We built a functional demo with a clean and intuitive layout. Marcia reviewed everything like a fierce mentor. When we finished, I sent the material to Maple and Sage, a retail chain interested in innovation for small suppliers. I didn't expect an immediate response, but it came in 2 days. I received the email with trembling hands. Rebecca Tran, a senior executive at Maple and Sage, had scheduled a call. I stared at the screen as if it were a dream. Jared celebrated as if we had won an award. I only thought about how it had all started with an idea no one had taken seriously, not even my family. Now someone important wanted to hear us. We have a call scheduled with Rebecca Tran. On the morning of the presentation, I could barely eat breakfast. My stomach was in knots. Jared tried to calm me with bad jokes, but even he was nervous. We connected to the call with Rebecca Tran punctually. She had an analytical gaze and few words. We presented the demo, explained the model, the logistical gains for the network. Rebecca listened in silence, then asked for a simulation to test in a pilot unit. If you can deliver this in 60 days, the conversation continues, she said. That sounded like a unique chance and also like a sentence. 60 days to put together something functional, robust, ready to integrate with store systems. I accepted instantly without thinking about the nights we would lose. Jared looked at me with a mixture of pride and panic. We began the biggest marathon of my life there. We assembled a lean team with 2 freelance programmers and a temporary project manager. We worked in shifts, running tests day and night. I divided my time between technical decisions and meetings with Marcia. Jared became an official partner with a simple and sincere contract. Every small step forward was celebrated like a championship win. The delivery day arrived with a pounding heart and deep, tired eyes. But we delivered. 60 days to deliver everything. Can you do it? On the other side, Rebecca and the Maple and Sage team successfully ran the solution. In a week, the pilot was running stably. In 2, the numbers began to improve. In the 3rd, she called us again. We want to expand the contract to 12 units, she said without mincing words. Jared hugged me right away. I could only smile, as if I didn't know if I was living or dreaming. The contract expansion gave us breathing room to better structure the operation. We hired technical support and migrated the system to more robust servers. We were still small, but now we were real. Marcia organized a small cocktail party to celebrate. I went in jeans and trembling inside. I heard praise from executives, saw cards being exchanged, and for the first time allowed myself to say aloud, I am the founder of CraftLogic. With the expansion came outside attention. A local tech blog ran a story. A national magazine wanted to know more. Suddenly my story, the one no one wanted to hear when it came from a daughter's mouth, was being told by others. Even so, in the Lawson house, the silence remained intact. No calls. No messages. I had won something, but I still wanted to be seen. We want to expand the contract to 12 units. Jared walked into the room one day with a magazine in his hand. "Mom, look at this," he said, imitating a proud child's voice. On the cover, my serious face under the title, "The Woman Who Hacked Her Own Destiny." I laughed, not knowing if I was laughing out of nervousness or relief. He handed me the copy, and for a moment I thought about sending it to my parents. I gave up. They probably wouldn't even open it. Even with the name gaining traction, there was something in me that remained stuck in that dining room where I was silenced. Success wasn't enough. I still hoped, somewhere quiet in my chest, for a recognition that might never come. Jared pulled me back to reality. "You did this without anyone," he said. And he was right. I had made myself. But there was still a part of me that desired a gesture. A word. A minimal break in the silence. It was a childish wish perhaps, but real. I wanted them to know, not to applaud me, but to know who I really was. And at that moment I realized maybe they never will. "Mom, look at this," Jared says, showing the magazine with Ruby on the cover. With financial stability, something inside me began to stir. It wasn't anger nor revenge, it was disguised care. I opened an anonymous fund and paid off my parents' overdue bills, the ones the local press reported through public lawsuits. I used a ghost consultancy to direct scholarships to my nephews. I did everything in absolute secrecy, ensuring they would never trace it back to me. It was my silent way of loving. Weeks later, I received a message from a neighborhood acquaintance. "Your father said a miraculous help appeared. He almost didn't believe it." I imagined myself observing from afar, like someone sending a note through a window. It was paradoxical. I didn't want recognition, but I wanted them to know that I still cared. It was like shouting behind glass, without sound but with intent. And still I didn't expect gratitude. One afternoon, I heard from a close acquaintance that Douglas Lawson had commented at the local coffee shop. Finally, a charitable soul in this world. I smiled bitterly. They received my care without knowing where it came from, as if it were from a blessed stranger. And perhaps that's what I had become. A stranger. But a stranger who, even rejected, still reached out. The father comments at home. Finally, a charitable soul in this world. The routine was no longer just about work. I started therapy recommended by Marcia. In the first few sessions I spoke little. Silence was still my main language. But little by little, I put into words the weight I had carried since leaving that house. My therapist, with calm eyes and a gentle voice, listened to me talk about invisibility, rejection, and the relentless search for validation. Then on a rainy afternoon, she asked the question that unraveled me. "Why do you still want their love, Ruby?" The phrase hung in the air as if time had stopped. I felt my chest tighten, my eyes sting. I had never asked myself that question so clearly. I spent days reliving it, as if my mind didn't know how to answer. It was like trying to decipher an ancient code, buried inside me since childhood. In the next session, after a long silence, I finally managed to say aloud, "Because I don't know who I am without it." The phrase scared me, not because it was painful but because it was too true. I had built a company, a team, a new life, but I still sought the love of those who couldn't see me, as if my identity depended on applause that never came. Ruby responds, "Because I don't know who I am without it." The days passed peacefully until the unexpected happened. An envelope arrived at the office with no sender. Inside, an invitation with familiar handwriting. Thanksgiving dinner at the Lawsons' house. My hands trembled. Jared saw my face pale and didn't need to ask. The invitation was polite, almost cold, as if the absence of resentment was enough to justify the absence of affection. I thought about ignoring it. I thought about tearing it up. But I couldn't. For days I debated with myself. Going meant exposing myself again. It meant sitting at the same table where I was excluded. But part of me still wanted to understand, or at least confront. Jared looked at me cautiously, ready to support any decision. I chose to go. Not to be accepted, but to close the cycle. I wanted to look them in the eyes and see if, finally, There was something there beyond the daughter who failed to obey. But the final detail of the invitation broke me. We are curious to know how college is going. The lie was still the bond that connected them to the idea of me. They didn't want to know me, they wanted me to fit in. As if my worth was still tied to a fictitious diploma. That hurt more than all the words spoken years ago. They want me to tell them how college is going. The room was almost the same as years ago. The same lace tablecloth, the same smell of cinnamon and roast in the air. But everything felt tighter. The words were measured, the gestures rehearsed. You look great, my mother said without meeting my eyes. Natalie commented with laughter about the difficulties of medical school. As if she were the only one with stories of overcoming. I smiled in silence, absorbing the performance with a lump in my throat. Dinner was a forced choreography. No one mentioned the time I spent away. No one asked what I really did. The food was warm but the atmosphere was cold. Natalie spoke as if holding the center of the table with her own hands. I watched in silence. With each sentence I felt more out of place. Until under the table my phone vibrated. It was Jared. A single message. Leave before it hurts. I held the phone like an amulet. I wanted to get up and leave but something held me back. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or pride. But I stayed. I observed everything with clearer eyes. They hadn't changed. They just learned to mask it better. And I, there, trying to fit my new self into an old broken frame. Jared sends a message. Leave before it hurts. It was Matthew, my brother-in-law, who began to unravel the charade. You work with Instagram, right? He asked, with a smile that feigned curiosity. I took a deep breath. No, I'm the founder of a technology company focused on the B2B market, I replied with elegance. But the conversation had already soured. Natalie rolled her eyes. My mother cleared her throat. My father, as always, said nothing. The tension grew like a thread about to snap. And then came the blow. Natalie stood up, faced my parents, and declared, You know she was never really part of this family, don't you? The silence turned into a knife. For a moment no one moved. My heart pounded as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. But I didn't cry. I just opened my bag and took out a plain envelope. Inside were documents. Contracts, donation receipts, transactions. Everything I had done for them. Hidden in silence out of love. I placed the envelope on the table and said, If you want the truth, here it is. The room fell silent. The smell of food became a distant memory. Ruby takes an envelope from her bag. Douglas was the first to react. He picked up the papers, read them over, and then, with the same coldness as years ago, tore everything into pieces. His eyes didn't waver. We don't need your charity, he said. My mother remained motionless. Natalie crossed her arms. It was as if my attempt to be seen was an offense. Generosity became a threat. And love a rejected currency. I stood up, my body trembling and my face serene. I had done everything right. I had come back with dignity, with respect, with truth. But they remained trapped in the image they had created of me, and defended it like a cracked mirror. I took a deep breath. I looked each of them in the eyes. And then, finally, I released what had been stuck for years. Then you don't need it anymore. I took a step back, feeling a strange relief. Goodbye. The word cut through the air. I walked to the door without looking back. Outside, the night was cold, but for the first time, I felt my chest warmed by something no one could take away. My freedom. Ruby stands up and says, Then you don't need it anymore. Goodbye. After dinner, I decided to truly reinvent myself. I rented a spacious house in Clearwater, with ocean views and enough space for a new beginning. I invited Jared and 3 other team members to set up the new Craft Logic office there. We painted the walls, assembled the desks, chose plants and paintings with phrases that reminded us why we were there. It was the rebirth my soul needed. The atmosphere was light, yet committed. We began to restructure everything. New products, new branding, new workflows. For the first time, I felt that I was leading something bigger than a project. It was a legacy. I was no longer an entrepreneur trying to prove something. I was the founder of an ecosystem. The team felt it too. We were creating something of our own, in our own way, with freedom and purpose. Among boxes and paints, Jared looked at me and said, You know what this is? This is where Craft Logic 2.0 begins. I smiled, emotional. I looked around and saw more than an office. It was a creative home, a symbol of overcoming and proof that it was never about the diplomas. It was always about the courage to persevere. It was finally the fresh start I deserved. This is where Craft Logic 2.0 begins. During the house renovation, I met Caleb Meyer, the architect responsible for the structural adjustments. At first, our conversations were formal, focused on deadlines and materials. But little by little, he began to see beyond the project. There was something in the way I spoke about the company, the ideas that intrigued him. And there was something in his calm listening that made me relax, even without wanting to. I resisted, of course. I always resisted. But Caleb didn't invade, he remained. That's how he entered, without haste. We started having coffee between hammer blows and layout decisions. Conversations evolved into comfortable silences, then into exchanges of life stories. One day he asked, "Why do you always seem to apologize for everything you've achieved?" That paralyzed me. I didn't know I was doing that, but he was right. That night, I stared at my reflection in the glass. I saw myself as I was now. Woman, leader, builder of something that was once just a dream. And then something inside me changed. I decided to stop shrinking who I was to fit into spaces that no longer fit me. The next day I opened my laptop, went to my profile and posted, "Hi, I'm Ruby, CEO of Craft Logic." Ruby posts, "Hi, I'm Ruby, CEO of Craft Logic." The post went viral in a matter of hours. Comments, shares, messages from young people saying they felt represented. The notifications seemed endless. Dozens of investors reached out. Acceleration proposals, invitations to panels, even an acquisition offer. One of them was particularly impactful, $20 million to sell everything. I looked at the number, took a deep breath and declined. Jared's eyes widened, but then he smiled. "You're not building to sell, are you?" I shook my head. That was it. Craft Logic was more than a product. It was my story, my pain, my healing. Selling it would be abandoning parts of myself that were still blooming. It was more than money. It was about retaining the right to be who I had become. When asked why I refused, I replied simply, "I am my own masterpiece." For the first time I felt whole without needing anyone's validation. That wasn't arrogance. It was belonging. It was the freedom to finally recognize myself in the mirror and like what I saw. I am my own masterpiece. It was on a golden spring afternoon that I announced the birth of Forge Forward, an educational and creative fund aimed at young people like me. Invisible visionaries. People who don't fit traditional molds, but who carry the fire of creation in their hearts. I wrote a manifesto, published it on the website, and opened applications. We received over 800 applications in 48 hours. And then we selected the first scholarship recipient. Alicia Monroe, 17 years old, creator of a support network for Black girls in marginalized communities. Her project made me cry. I saw my own story there, told by another voice. We invited Alicia to visit Craft Logic headquarters. She entered shyly, but with a sparkle in her eyes. I looked at her as Marcia had looked at me, with faith in what was yet to blossom. The first meeting with Alicia was like a reversed mirror. She spoke with passion, fear, and hope all at once. I listened with an open heart. For the first time, the cycle was inverted. I was the support, the mirror, the safe haven. Something inside me realigned. As if, by taking care of another Ruby, I was taking care of myself too. It was healing, pure and silent. First scholarship recipient confirmed. Alicia Monroe. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Alicia. "Thank you for seeing me," read the last line. I cried alone as many times before. But this time from a new place. From gratitude. From understanding. The invisible girl I once was now offered light to others. It was as if every gesture of care returned to me in the form of silent recognition. The letter became a framed picture in my office. Every time I passed by it, I felt something healing. The guilt, the fear, the effort to be accepted. All of that began to dissolve. And in its place, something lighter was born. It wasn't forgiveness. It was understanding. And that, I realized, was even more powerful. Alicia reminded me that I no longer needed to prove anything. I just needed to keep opening paths for other Alicias. Because in the end, true legacy wasn't what I accumulated, but what I allowed to blossom in others. My success now had another measure. How many lives I would help transform. Alicia sends a letter. Thank you for seeing me. On a golden spring afternoon, Caleb and I were sitting on the porch. The sea gently lapped in the background. He looked at me with the serenity of someone who didn't want a quick answer. Have you forgiven yourself yet? He asked, his voice low. I remained silent for a while, feeling the weight and lightness of the question. I had never thought about it so clearly. Have I let go of the guilt? Have I stopped wishing for a different past? Have I released the burden of not having been the daughter they expected? I took a deep breath. I looked at Caleb, then at the orange-tinged sky. The words came with firmness like a key turning inside. I'm learning. But now aloud. The answer wasn't for him. It was for me. I no longer needed to whisper my worth. I could say it in a firm voice without trembling. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't an end. It was a path. And I had begun to walk it. I'm learning. But now aloud. I wasn't expecting that call. When I saw Natalie's name on the screen for a second, I hesitated. I answered in silence. On the other end, her voice seemed smaller, less confident than usual. I wanted to apologize, she said without mincing words. The house is different. Empty. Dad doesn't talk to anyone. I was silent. I expected resentment, perhaps denial, but I received vulnerability. Natalie took a deep breath and continued. He wrote a letter. It's in the envelope on the shelf. He said it was for you. I don't know what's in there, but he changed. That went through me like an old whisper. I always wanted to hear this, but now that it was happening, I didn't know what to do. Natalie's voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. Something, in fact, had changed over there. I spent hours staring at the ceiling trying to decide. In the end, I asked her to send me the letter. When the envelope arrived, my heart raced as if I was about to relive everything I tried to forget. I opened it slowly, almost afraid of what it might contain. The first words were formal, then more human. Douglas spoke of his childhood, his fear of making mistakes, the pride he never knew how to show. He wrote a letter. I read slowly, absorbing each phrase as if it were a patch stitched into me. He spoke of the days he saw me grow up but didn't understand who I was. He said his silence wasn't a lack of love but ignorance. That his pride was so great it prevented him from saying the right words. That he saw in me a reflection of what he never had the courage to be, free. And that, because of that, he rejected me. The words were clumsy but sincere. I'm sorry I didn't see you when you needed me most. I was trapped in a world that didn't understand yours. When I finished, I couldn't hold back the tears. It was as if all my wounds finally received a name. It hurt, but it was a kind of pain that purifies. I didn't know what to do with it. It was what I always wanted, but didn't know how to embrace. I held the letter in my hands for hours. I thought about the nights I had wished for this recognition, even in secret. I thought about everything I had built without them and despite them. Now he was reaching out, even if belatedly. Jared found me in the office, eyes swollen. Now what? I whispered, as if he had the answer. But I knew. The decision was mine. Ruby cries. Now what? I made the decision in silence. I wrote to Natalie calmly. I agree to meet. But not at their house. I need a neutral place. She understood. We set it for Sunday at a discreet, airy seaside cafe. It took me days to process the idea. I rehearsed phrases I might never say. I imagined reunions and also rejections. But I knew I had to go. Not for them, for me. I set clear boundaries. No judgment, no lies, no pretenses. If something new was to begin, it had to be with the whole truth. Caleb supported me with a calm gaze. Jared offered a ride, but I preferred to go alone. It was something I needed to face on my own terms. I took the letter with me. And a lighter silence made of timid hope. On the appointed day, I woke up early. The breeze carried the smell of salt and promises. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I was no longer the shrinking daughter who had left that house years ago. I was a woman made of choices, scars, and courage. What would come next I didn't know. But I was ready to look them in the eyes and finally to see myself too. We're going to meet at a cafe by the sea. I arrived early. The cafe was simple, with wooden tables and large windows that framed the sea. I chose a table in the corner, from where I could see the entrance. When they arrived, I felt an old chill run down my spine. My parents seemed smaller, more bowed by time. But there was something new in their eyes, something I recognized. It was pain. And perhaps longing. In the first few minutes, no one said anything. We just looked at each other. Linda was the first to move. She reached across the table, touching my hand. "I'm sorry if we didn't see you," she whispered with suppressed tears. That went through me like a bolt of lightning. I wanted to hug her, but I just closed my eyes and squeezed her hand back. Sometimes forgiveness begins like this, with a simple gesture without a speech. Douglas was visibly nervous. He clasped his hands in his lap, staring at the floor. When he finally looked up, he just said, "You've grown so much." And I missed all of it. The phrase hung between us like a nonverbal plea for a fresh start. I didn't answer. Not yet. But something in me softened. Perhaps it wasn't about erasing the past, but about creating something new with what remained. Linda holds Ruby's hand. "I'm sorry if we didn't see you." After a few minutes of shared silence, my father straightened in his chair and said, "I want to see your company. The headquarters. What you've built." That caught me off guard. For years I had dreamed of this recognition. Now it appeared like this without fanfare. I looked at him carefully, like someone testing if the ground is firm. "With one condition," I replied firmly. "No judgment." He nodded immediately. "I promise. I want to see the real you." There was no irony, no doubt in his voice. He was a man tired of fighting against what he didn't understand. For the first time I felt he wanted to know me, not shape me. It was an invitation to rebuild bridges, not walls. A request to be present. And for the first time I considered saying yes without losing myself in the process. We agreed to schedule the visit. We exchanged contacts, glances, and for the first time, words that weren't laden with demands. It wasn't perfect, far from it. But it was human. And after everything, perhaps that was what mattered most. For the first time they seemed to want to know Ruby. We agreed to schedule the visit. We exchanged contacts, glances, and for the first time, words that weren't laden with demands. It wasn't perfect, far from it. But it was human. And after everything, perhaps that was what mattered most. For the first time they seemed to want to know Ruby, not the idealized daughter. That was me. Whole, imperfect, but finally free. He says, "I promise. I want to see the real you." We left the cafe and walked together along the beach. The wind messed up our hair, but no one cared. We spoke little. Each step said more than 1,000 justifications. I no longer needed to prove anything. I didn't need to dim my light to fit into the shadows of their expectations. For the first time we walked side by side, without masks, without scripts, without shame. My mother recounted small childhood memories. My father remembered a drawing I made when I was 8. And I, for the first time, listened without the weight of judgment. I felt the sun touch my face, and inside me, something finally clicked into place. It wasn't perfection. It was reconnection. And that was enough. I had returned, but not as before. I returned as who I am, and that was my victory. When we stopped by the sea, I looked at them and felt something I had never felt so clearly. Peace. Not for having them back, but for no longer needing to flee. For allowing myself to be there, whole. I no longer fit the old mold, and finally it didn't hurt. It was freedom. But not the kind that comes from breaking away. The kind that comes from rebuilding. Now I know freedom isn't breaking away. It's rebuilding as myself. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced anything similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.